All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Hess III with Hess 3 Consulting. Today we are here to talk about foundations of capacity building as part of our ongoing professional development series tied to the strategic prevention framework. If this is your first time with us, welcome. I think this is now our third or fourth training in this particular series, but I've been working with the University of Arkansas at Little Rock now, I believe, going on 6 years, maybe 7. And I have about 15 years of experience working in health and human services. A lot of that has been in prevention, so it's an honor to continue to be able to work with you guys. I got to come out there last year, and hopefully I'll be able to get back out there sometime very soon so we can see each other in person. So the company does a lot of things, but the most important part is a lot of these things actually stem from the strategic prevention framework and are tied to or correlated to the activities that we do in our prevention work. So from some of the grassroots community-based work that I've done, I've kind of moved on, I guess, to a certain extent and started working in a larger picture, in a larger context with some of state level folks as well as nationally. And then doing a little bit of international work as well. So all of it has kind of grown. So there's a lot of different levels at which prevention happens, and we'll kind of hit on some of those as we go through today. So our specific learning objectives are related to the foundations of capacity building. So really to detail strategies that identify skills and resources needed for success, to describe methods for recruiting and developing those skills and resources, and then of course strategies to incorporate member retention into all of our activities. But one thing that I have found is that capacity building means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we're going to define some things and we'll work through that this afternoon. But I wanted to take a quick pause, and you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a quick question around what it is that you were hoping to learn from today. And so if you came here or signed in or logged in with a specific goal in mind or really wanting to hear about a particular topic, would you mind please typing that into the chat box for me, because I will try to incorporate it and make sure that it's going to get addressed today. So give folks just a quick second if you want to type away, and then I will proceed even while you guys continue to type. But I would love to see a couple of responses, even if it's a little bit more generic or introductory. I really want to hear kind of what brought you into today's presentation, and I hope it's not because you were forced to join us. All right, so while you guys are typing, I will continue forward. So there's a couple of things that we really wanted to review prior to diving into capacity building. So I wasn't able, it doesn't look like I got the SPF, the Strategic Prevention Framework dial in this presentation, but capacity building kind of fits in the process after our needs assessment piece. And I personally, so the typical strategic prevention process is your assessment, you do capacity building, then you do planning, and then you do your implementation, and then you do your evaluation. I personally like to switch that up a little bit. And I like to do capacity building after planning. And part of that is that I think that the planning process really helps to identify what we know that we know, what we know that others know, what others know that we know, but we don't know that we know. And then, of course, capacity building is really focused on this fourth box here, which is shaded in blue, the things that we don't know that we don't know. And obviously, this is the danger zone. So we talked a little bit about the SWOT analysis last week when we did our previous presentation, and kind of that those weaknesses that are also threats is kind of similar in this area. The things that we don't know is really kind of the problematic area. And so from our needs assessment and from our planning phase, we're able to start identify some of those things by convening stakeholders and everything that we do in the needs assessment and planning process. We're able to kind of get a sense of, well, we don't know what funding opportunities exist, or we don't know some of those things that we know that we don't know. start to emerge. And then by conversing with stakeholders and key partners and collaborators, we're able to identify those things that we didn't even know that we didn't know. And I know a lot of that's confusing, but we will hopefully make it a little bit more clear. And I'm really excited to see some of the responses in the chat box centered around group retention, coalition building, and then, of course, the final comment about prevention work in general. So, Michael, hopefully we will be able to get some information to you. So, kind of stemming from our needs assessment and stemming from our planning process, and again, I know that's a little bit out of order, but that's just my own adaptation. We talked last week as part of the needs assessment process and planning process about asset mapping. So hopefully this is a review for you, but all of this starts to feed into our capacity building. So based off of what you've done in your needs assessment, and I'll describe this slide kind of concretely so that helps. So in the needs assessment process, we talked about if we identified, that we had a significant problem with, let's use a good example. Hold on, let me see. Crisis services. So we're going to use that as an example. So crisis services is the third item on this table. So in our needs assessment, we identified that we need at least 2 providers, maybe one in northern Arkansas and one in southern Arkansas, that we're really able to handle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, kind of these really acute crisis issues that arise. And you can see here that of the 5 different providers that we interviewed, A, B, C, D, and E, only one of them offers that service. And so we've identified that we need 2, we only have 1. Obviously, there's a gap there. So in our prevention world, this might look a little bit more like our needs assessment identifies, that our community is really just not aware of substance use issues in the community. So we need education and training, and maybe we're targeting adolescents. So we've decided that we need a good, strong substance abuse prevention program in middle schools and high schools. And so the gaps obviously could be that maybe 1 of 5 schools has a program, the other 4 don't. So there's a gap there, right? So the gap represents where we need to do capacity building. And I know that that's not, super advanced, or hopefully that's not super complicated for folks. But our needs assessment is what drives this process. And that's kind of the linkage that we're wanting to draw here, is that hopefully the needs assessment was comprehensive enough to really answer some of those questions. And if it wasn't, that's okay. We can always go back and ask more questions and continue to learn from our community. And so I would encourage you, if for whatever reason you're not aware of kind of what's going on in your community or centered around prevention efforts, I definitely would encourage you to continue that learning process, no matter if it's a formal needs assessment or an informal inquiry, to help us go through that. Mary, I see that you're attempting to interact with us. I don't know if you're wanting to raise your hand and speak or what. But if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat box for me. It doesn't look like you have a microphone, so I can't turn your audio on. But I'll definitely keep plowing away. And if there's something, Mary, that you specifically would like, please type it in the chat box. So let's talk about what capacity building actually is, because like I said, it's kind of that gap. It's addressing the gap in the process. So by definition, capacity building, also referred to as capacity development, or is a conceptual approach to development that focuses on understanding the obstacles that inhibit people, government, international organizations, non-government organizations from realizing their development goals, while enhancing the abilities that will allow them to achieve measurable and sustainable results. So again, the focus is on this development process. That we first need to understand the obstacles. So again, those gaps, those weaknesses, those threats to our process or to our initiatives. And then from there, we're going to work on enhancing our abilities to achieve those results. Now you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there is a link to a video. I'm not going to actually play that video because it's a little bit long and I'm concerned that we have a lot of content for today, but I wanted to offer it to you because it talks a lot about, I think it's the state of Maine, and their substance abuse prevention initiatives and how they were able to build capacity at the state level through partnerships, enhancing coalition capacity, braiding funding initiatives. And we're going to talk a lot about braiding of funding and resources towards the end of today. But it's a really good presentation. So I definitely, or a video, and I recommend that you go ahead and take a minute to watch that when you get a chance. But I did want to pause, and based off of this definition that I just presented, I wanted to see kind of what your inferences were or what your insights are to capacity building. So again, if you'll get on that keyboard and in that chat box and type in any insights or thoughts that you have around capacity building and your own understanding of what it is. I would love to hear from you guys on that process. And I'm going to keep plowing as you guys type, but I definitely want to hear from you and I will definitely circle back when we get some responses in. So I wanted to offer a couple of other definitions because I think that they really do help us kind of conceptualize what capacity looks like. And again, this does seem to be the more abstract component of the strategic prevention framework, at least for a lot of folks. And so SAMHSA, which obviously is the creator of the strategic prevention framework, has kind of laid out four main components of capacity building. So raising stakeholder awareness, engaging diverse stakeholders, strengthening collaboration efforts, and preparing the prevention workforce or workforce development training, which this literal webinar would be an example of that. But so there's also another definition that comes from Shifting the Paradigm of Practice, which is an excellent book. And it talks about, or it defines capacity building as developing a conceptual framework, establishing an organizational attitude, developing a vision and a strategy, developing an organizational structure, and acquiring skills and resources. And there's a couple of things that I really liked about this because these are kind of the two sides of the coin, so to speak. The latter, so shifting the paradigm of practice, really focuses on kind of what we can do within our coalitions to help build capacity around our activities and our work. And then SAMHSA's definition really talks about the external efforts that we do in our communities, which is about building those relationships and the educational component and things of that nature. So when we're talking about capacity building today, I'm probably going to emphasize the acquiring skills and resources component a lot, because the goal for today is really to help us develop capacity within our organizations so that we can then turn around and develop capacity in our communities. And I hope that that is an appropriate kind of framing that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think that that's a great definition of capacity building. So to bring together resources and stakeholders, establish a clear understanding of what's going on so everyone can achieve a common objective or outcome. That's exactly the end goal of what we're going to be talking about today or what we are discussing. So thank you for sharing. So there's two kind of components we're going to talk about under acquiring skills and resources. So acquiring skills, by definition, or at least how we're going to kind of conceptualize it today, is about recruiting highly qualified people as well as workforce development. And I'm going to use kind of a coined phrase that I oftentimes recite quite a bit, is that there are two ways to kind of acquire resources, whatever those may be, whether it be finances or whether it be knowledge, technical skills, abilities, workforce capacity, is that you can develop it or you can recruit it. And we'll kind of use that framework as we move forward. But as we talk about acquiring resources, this other component really does oftentimes require looking at partnerships, potentially mergers and acquisitions, which might be scary. So take a deep breath. We're going to talk through that and why that's a valuable option sometimes. And then looking at revenue streams, and this is additional revenue streams. We're going to talk a lot about braiding revenue streams today. And so I won't go too far down that rabbit trail because we're headed there rapidly. So when we're recruiting workforce. So when we're looking at acquiring skills, recruitment, and workforce development, again, we're going to go back to our needs assessment as we talked about in the beginning, kind of with that gap analysis, and identify what skills we need. So this is something that not a lot in community-based projects. I see it less often than in like organizations that have the capacity of like a human resources department and things of that nature. But since our efforts are typically more volunteer-based, have much more limited resources, than a very large corporation, this is something that's really critical that large corporations do that I think could really benefit some of our grassroots efforts. And so, looking at our needs assessment and looking at our strategic plan, and this is why I like to put capacity building after strategic planning versus before it, because I really think that your strategy should drive your structure, and that's something. Again, another coined phrase I say very often. And so if our strategies are for us to launch a social media campaign that targets our community to raise awareness around adolescent marijuana use or cocaine or something, if we're going to be launching a social media campaign, then we need a social media expert or someone that is able to execute that. And so our strategy is driving our structure versus our structure driving our strategies. And so again, that's my 2 cents on why I often put capacity building after planning. But so based off of what our strategies are, we want to look at our workforce, or kind of our volunteers, the people that are engaged in our coalition or within our organization, and identify what their skills are. And of course, everyone's going to have a place, but I personally advocate again that the strategies kind of are the preeminent component, and that we earnestly look to increase our capacity through these 2 concepts of recruiting them or developing them. So using social media as an example, if we don't have anyone around the table today that's a true expert in social media, then we're going to use these 2 options kind of as our way to figure out how we can build capacity in that area. So when recruiting, of course, there's formal and informal strategies. So and you can decide, the extent to which is appropriate for the organization or the coalition that you're working in. I've definitely participated with groups that get very, very formal and structured. And I've also worked with quite a few organizations that stay a little bit less formal. And hopefully none of these are, super mind-blowing ideas. But for volunteer-led organizations, oftentimes maybe these aren't as innate, or they're not as utilized or leveraged as they may be in other settings. And so, so for recruiting, we want to first, of course, define roles and responsibilities. That could include writing a formal job description if you would like to, or maybe it's just a couple of sentences of what are the expectations of this social media individual. Identifying the assessment criteria. So how are we going to ensure that the person that we recruit and or the person that we're going to invest in developing these skills, what is it that we actually want them to know? And that's a really critical component. Something as simple as social media is quite complex. And people, that promote themselves as being social media experts may specialize in a particular form of social media. And might not be experts or specialized in the area or the specific type of social media it is that you're wanting to execute. And so understanding, kind of what that criteria would be that you want to evaluate your candidates on is really important. Based off of those criteria, of course, you're going to solicit, and that can be through a number of different means. Of course, the irony of soliciting social media attention or a social media expert via social media is really fun. And of course, considering your networks as well as traditional kind of forms of advertisement. So, or solicitation. So Craigslist, jobbing.com. It is very plausible, and a lot of people do post volunteer positions on formal employment sites. So please don't be hesitant to do that. It's a great way to recruit talent. A lot of folks are interested in picking up volunteer activities to promote or to kind of develop their resumes or their skills and or add volunteer role onto their resume, because some folks value that. So definitely feel free to use kind of those job posting boards and some of those more formal employment avenues, even if you are just posting for a volunteer position and there's not compensation available. Of course, you want to negotiate or discuss with that individual, especially if you're formally hiring them. And then the onboarding piece is another thing that I don't see happen as often within coalitions and kind of community-based or volunteer roles, but it is also really important. So if this is the first time that you've had a social media expert, to continue with our example, the onboarding might just primarily be about, the history of the organization and how long the coalition's been around. And, if you've been around a long time, some of that history may be really important, and understanding who these key stakeholders are. Kind of think about, whenever you start a new job, those first couple of days are learning about the organization, policies and procedures, rules, regulations, where the bathroom is, where the water cooler is, some of those things. And those things absolutely apply to new coalition members or to new volunteers within the organization. So definitely take the time to onboard people. It will help them feel oriented. It will help them feel engaged. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about volunteer retention, because this is absolutely one of the critical junctures that helps volunteers feel like they're contributing, feel like they have a place at the table, feel like they have a clearly defined role, and ultimately it will lead to them staying longer. So the other option is if we don't have any funding to hire somebody, and if for whatever reason we don't, or we're not able or not successful at recruiting someone, maybe we post position, maybe we scour our networks, we ask everyone around the table and everyone we know if anyone knows a social media expert, and we just are completely unsuccessful, which is very plausible, especially in kind of more rural areas and smaller communities. It's absolutely quite probable even that some specific niche skill sets just don't exist. So of course the other option here is to develop these skills. And so you can do this the same way, that a human resources department would do it for a large corporation, draw from those lessons and work on that even within your coalition or within your volunteers, and help them develop workforce development plans. And so, I might be a really eager, passionate volunteer, and I'm really interested in supporting the organization and whatever they need. I have no experience whatsoever with social media, but if that's the need, then I'm willing to help. And that type of inertia and energy is absolutely critical and helpful. And when there's nobody else to do it, it can be exactly what we need. One phrase I often say, and it obviously put it in context, but I always say sometimes the only ability you need is availability. And sometimes that's true for us as coalition leaders or as volunteer organizers and coordinators. And sometimes the only ability we need is someone with availability, because we can train them and coach them. So I would encourage you to take that pure, unbridled passion and funnel it into some targeted areas where you feel like your coalition needs to develop. And again, that can be based off of, or it should be based off of your strategic plan. So looking at a work or kind of a training plan or development plan, if you need a social media coordinator and no one in the group knows how to do social media, then it's time to start diving headfirst into social media. And whether or not, we go check out books at the local library or access free resources online, looking at workshops, of course, academic coursework. A lot of community colleges and universities allow you to audit classes for free. So it's definitely something to consider. Leveraging Coursera and Khan Academy. There's tons of online schools basically that are free and accessible, that will help folks to learn specific strategies. So especially for those of you that may be in your needs assessment process and it's been a while since you've been in statistics class, I definitely recommend Khan Academy, which is KAHN Academy, and a couple of other online tools to kind of help revisit. Even YouTube can be very, very helpful. As a plug, all of our trainings over the last at least 2 years, but maybe 3 years, are available on YouTube. And so if you have a new volunteer or team member that doesn't know anything about the strategic prevention framework, just send them over to my YouTube page. There's quite a few videos up there that may help to onboard them or orient them to kind of what prevention is and how it is that we operate. But so, sometimes even shadowing and mentoring. So identify an expert at a local corporation. Maybe it's a business that one of your spouses works at or another volunteer, and they'd be willing to set up a meeting or let someone spend a day there with their person. When I was working on my first needs assessment, one of the things that we wanted to do was do some GIS mapping of our data to find out exactly where our respondents lived and kind of lay that over kind of where we saw our substance abuse trends. And so I was living in Arizona at the time, and so I went to Arizona State University, and they had a engineering school and a mapping expert. And I sat with him for a day, and he taught me how to do GIS mapping. And then we incorporated it into our strategic plan, into our needs assessment. And of course, our funders were very happy with having data presented in that way. But it just took a couple of hours. I had the availability to do it. It didn't cost anything. And I had access to some leading experts. So definitely leverage those resources. And of course, independent study. I spend way too much money on Amazon buying books. And so you can actually resell them back on Amazon as well. So if you need to invest heavily into some books, maybe you can recoup some of the costs by reselling them. But I think you guys are getting the sense of different ways to kind of help develop talent if and when you don't have anyone that you're able to recruit. And so I want to take a quick pause because I'm talking too much and see what other strategies that you guys have used or found effective. If you would please go ahead and type something in the chat box for me in response to that. So what strategies have you found effective? Or if you want to be simple and just give me a yes or a no, tell me yes if you think that these strategies are effective, or no if you want to challenge or maybe critique or provide some feedback on any of them. And a yes or a no I can expect from lots of people. So I hope to see lots of responses. Yeah, mentoring is a fantastic strategy. It's amazing how willing people are to, give up some time. And absolutely, Camille, that's a wonderful idea. Creating councils and expert panels, or even participating in other coalitions. There's lots of different ways to build those skills. One thing that's not up here that I just thought of, Camille, thank you for kind of triggering my brain, is using your local small business association. A lot of times there's a lot of really fantastic resources. There's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of smaller businesses that are willing to help and get their name out there, a network that are absolutely willing to donate or offer time to different projects. And it's a lot of kind of untapped talent, so to speak. So Camille, you triggered my thoughts with that, with mentioning councils, because small business associations are fantastic resources as well that I'm sure that they exist in various parts of Arkansas. I have fortunately been all over the state. I really miss the barbecue if anyone wants to send me some. And so I know some of the other areas are a little bit more rural and there may not be real robust developed systems, but especially in some of the more urban settings, you can definitely probably leverage some of those resources. Perfect. And so let's start talking about some of those. So Michael, you actually are one slide ahead of me talking about partnerships and collaboration. And so again, going back to our needs assessment, based on our identified needs and the asset mapping, we talked about SWOT analyses last time. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you can see here that I'm using this in the context of the partnership. So partnerships, depending on how legal you want to make them, are great, but they can also be risky. So if for whatever reason you are partnering on grant funding, there's a lot of considerations for you when choosing a partner, and that's something that you should definitely take seriously. And as a coalition or as an organization, be very strategic about weighing out the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your partnership, and then of course putting in kind of risk management strategies or activities that help protect you or minimize that partnership. And so, of course, in a like funding scenario, thinking about who's primary, how funding gets allocated, who has access to kind of request or authorize money to be spent. Those are all things to think about when working through kind of more formal partnerships. Informal partnerships can be as simple as, attending other people's coalition meetings, attending other people's, events and activities, maybe a letter of support or, some other type of public statement stating that you guys are supporting one another. Partnerships can be very fluid, but we really want those partnerships to build on strengths and opportunities while also planning for weaknesses and threats. And so some of the formal agreements, and you see this more in instances of funding, but developing an MOU or a memorandum of understanding, so helping to define roles and responsibilities of each partner. Typically in that memorandum, it is literally, party A proposes or will do X, Y, and Z, and party B is going to do A, B, and C. And if there are any issues, this is how we plan on addressing them. IGAs stand for Intergovernmental Agreements. So unless you are a government entity, that's going to be a little bit less likely. But that honestly, that may be a strategy that your coalition decides to advocate for, specifically if, for example, you're talking about substance abuse among children in the foster care system who may also be getting involved heavily in the juvenile justice system, you may, one of your goals may be to advocate for better coordination between those two government entities, in which case, while you may not be party to the intergovernmental agreement, you're advocating that the intergovernmental agreement be established, and you can help develop that. Collaborative protocols are similar to memorandums of understanding. But it's really, just the process of communication. It's a little bit less formal. And then, of course, if you're going after funding or if you're using a vendor agreement, contracts. And so you can see here kind of like a bullet pointed list of things to consider when doing all of that. Mechanisms for resolving problems is really important. So definitely take the time to have the awkward conversation and figure out, how this partnership's going to work. Because when people leave and go get new jobs, or when funding priorities shift, or resources dry up, a lot of issues may come to the surface. And if you have a formal agreement in place and you've thought through how you want to address those issues and work together, then that is going to help you in the process, and it's going to cut out any awkwardness, any contention or resentment that may build. A lot of that happens just naturally because business can be difficult, especially when resources are scarce. Cross-training is another really remarkable opportunity. And I've done this quite a bit with different groups, where we wanted to better understand the system so that we can better coordinate activities. And so, one example of that is if you're working in, the school system, and I use that as a common example because a lot of prevention activities do focus on schools, but getting some opportunity, spending some time with the faculty and asking them to coach you or train you kind of on what a day in the life of a student is like, or a day in the life of a teacher. It's a great opportunity to build rapport and empathy with them. And then you can offer in exchange for that, training on substance abuse trends, or how to identify early warning signs of substance use among youth, resources. There's a lot of different opportunities, but training, cross-training specifically, can be a great tool for engagement. It can also really help strengthen your partnership, because the more they understand your system and your process, the easier it's going to be for them to enter your world, which is what you really want. And the more you understand their life and their process, it's going to be easier for you to enter their world, which again, given that they're your partner, is exactly what you're going to want. Of course, detail resources, especially if it's a financial agreement, And then, depending on the nature of what you're doing, um, signing a non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality agreements, non-compete clauses that may or may not apply. In my consulting work, these are documents I kind of enter every meeting with, and am prepared to sign on behalf of my clients or for my clients. So they're not anything to be scary about, or afraid of or intimidated by. If you're unfamiliar with them, definitely take some time to get familiar with them, because essentially it's just going to say, I'm going to keep my mouth shut on the things we're going to talk about. And I'm not going to use the information you give me to then undermine you and your organization or what you're doing. So it gives, kind of a legal bias or basis, excuse me, for folks to trust you more. So those can be and woven into any type of formal agreement that you have. So I wanted to see if any of the groups on the phone have entered into any types of partnerships like this. And again, we can go with a simple Y for yes or N for no. If you've ever gone through kind of a formal agreement, we'll say within the context of the coalition or prevention work that you're currently operating in, give me a yes. And if you've never gone through a formal agreement like this, whether that be a contract or a memorandum of understanding, then give me an N in the chat box. All right, we're getting a good mix of stuff. That's great. Awesome. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm reading. Yeah, Michael, thank you for that great example about nurses and how you guys were able to collaborate. Having a clear understanding of kind of their process is absolutely very beneficial in building not only rapport but collaboration with them. Um, yeah, awesome. It seems like this is definitely something you guys are familiar with, at least for some of you, which is fantastic. And for those of you that are not familiar with these, I think we just identified some resources for you to reach out to if you have any questions about this. So definitely please pay attention to kind of whose strengths lie where, so you can leverage each other in the future. So mergers and acquisitions are kind of a iffy subject sometimes. So I'm going to hopefully phrase this in a way that's very strength-based and positive, because that's how I perceive mergers and acquisitions. And on a coalition level, this happens relatively rarely, but it does happen. And it's definitely something that should be on our radar, depending on the context in which we find ourselves, the environments in which you're operating. I have had to do this within coalitions, and sometimes it wasn't fun, and sometimes it was a wonderful experience. And so, a lot of things drive folks to mergers and acquisitions. But one of the benefits of them is that you're able to combine resources and skills. So not only financial resources, but also the unique skills that everyone has. And so, of course, a merger and acquisition is when two entities become one, right? An acquisition would be where you purchase the other, whereas a merger, there's not necessarily a financial transaction involved. But so, if for whatever reason you find your coalition or your organization in a position that either it's not able to fulfill its financial obligations, or you identify another organization that's really struggling that you think that you could really help benefit, this is definitely an option for you. A lot of the same stuff goes very similar to what we talked about in partnerships. Of course, you're going to be potentially acquiring an organization, so that's something to think through. But looking at confidentiality, of course, transparency between these parties. If there's like an actual like asset purchase or acquisition of assets, then there's a whole other legal framework and definitely have a lawyer involved. But discussing kind of what those are. But ultimately, kind of more in a programmatic format, we really want to focus on kind of building the shared vision, mission, values, and culture, making sure that there's alignment, making sure that any new folks that are coming over from a previous organization or coalition, really have an opportunity to participate. I think you guys probably will remember, if you were with us last week, that team development stage I described to you. So forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. And so recognizing that when a whole new wave of folks comes in, you got to start through that whole process all over again. There's a whole new team to be built and developed. And of course, those clearly defined roles and responsibilities will help during that transition. I've personally managed quite a few mergers and acquisitions of healthcare providers, as well as coalitions, like I mentioned. And so if for whatever reason this is something that perks your interest, please reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you about it confidentially or whatever, just to kind of share whatever knowledge I may have that's available to you. I don't see it very often in coalition world, but I did want to present it because I think it's an important viable solution for folks that are either really struggling and there's a proximal geographic partner that you could potentially merge with, or maybe strengthen your resources by collaborating a little bit more closely. So the other thing that we want to talk about, and this again goes back to that video that I did not play in the beginning, but I think it's definitely important. And I shared this similar slide, or at least this content, several weeks ago. That in 2002, there were approximately $86 million in grant funds from the federal government that came into Arkansas related to prevention. And so if you look on this slide, and it's real small, and so I apologize for that. Let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit, and maybe this helps. Now it's really big for me. I don't know how big it is for you. But there are a number of different departments, and these are federal government agencies, and the amount of money that they have allocated or had allocated to Arkansas to help reduce the availability and misuse of drugs in 2012. And some of these are really abstract. So you have the Department of Agriculture through their Cooperative Extension Program, the Department of Education through the 21st Century Community Learning Centers Program, of course, the Department of Health and Human Services, which I think a lot of folks probably assume. But some of these funding opportunities may be different or unique. So promoting safe and stable families, transitional living for homeless youth, medical assistance program, alcohol research, drug abuse and addiction research, block grants for prevention. That's where a lot of the funding for strategic prevention framework comes from. Excuse me, the PATH projects, so projects for assistance in transition from homelessness, regional and national significance projects, access to recovery programs, Healthy Start funding, emergency solutions. Moving down into the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So emergency solutions, shelters, supportive housing programs. The Department of Justice offers a number of things for juvenile delinquency and accountability, residential treatment, second chance prisoner reentry initiatives. Looking at the Department of Transportation has funding for alcohol impaired driving countermeasures. The VA has stuff to prevent VA homelessness. And the Office of National Drug Policy looks at drug-free communities, high-intensity drug trafficking areas. So some of this, you may be looking at me or looking at the screen and saying, why is he talking about this? And it's because when we're talking about gaps and we're talking about building capacity, it often requires some creativity and some brainstorming, about different resources that exist in the community. And so while we, as one line item on this long list of funding, the fund, and again, this data is a little old, and I recognize that, and programs definitely sunset and new programs initiate, and so there's a lot of evolution. But I offer this as a means to think outside the box a little bit. So we see that there's a lot of different ways that substance abuse impacts the community, and we all know that, but there's a lot of different resources that also exist, and there may be opportunities for us to partner with some of these programs. One thing that's like a perfect quintessential example is, some education materials Why should we spend money on, defining what is alcohol abuse in a brochure when, 17 other organizations already do that? Is there an opportunity to partner locally with them, to leverage their resources, maybe develop a duly branded campaign or project? Looking at ways to think creatively at how, their resources may help or benefit our resources. And so depending on what your target audience is, if you're working in the school system, as we described, there's some work or some funding that exists in the school system. And so one thing that an organization did in Arizona, and I've talked about them quite a bit previously, is they outreach to schools and they coached schools on how to leverage 21st century funding, as well as a couple of other grant opportunities that the state of Arizona had to pay for them to come into the school and offer substance abuse prevention training. So it was a way that they were able to kind of cover their expenses for providing substance abuse education in middle schools and high schools. And through that mechanism of saying, hey, did you know that you're eligible for 21st century grant dollars? Did you know that you're eligible for Title IV dollars? Did you know, you could use administrative dollars? Like they use that cross training of understanding how schools are funded to go into schools and say, hey, you have all this money available. We're definitely willing and able to help you secure it, procure it, reallocate it in order to cover substance abuse prevention, because this is why this particular part of the community or this age group really needs this education. And as I've mentioned previously, this organization was raising approximately $1.2 million a year through this avenue or mechanism, as well as through individual donor engagement and other things that were unallocated. So there's a lot of ways to think creatively. And so you see kind of this like braid here, and braided funding is pretty self-explanatory. Essentially, you take funding from these different mechanisms and you tie it all together from different streams as well as from different strategies of funding in order to build and increase sustainability in your program. And that's that knot that you see at the top of there. So kind of the goal here is just to convey that there's a lot of different resources available within the state, but we just need to think creatively and outside the box on how that can help us to recruit resources, develop resources, not just financial ones, but also the ones that we need programmatically. This is another really long list of some other examples that are available within different states, that some of them are not on the previous slide. So again, I did not cross-check this particular list with the state of Arkansas. So you may want to do that if it's something that you're interested in. But these are other federal funding initiatives that are available to various different types of substance abuse activities nationally. So whether or not they apply in Arkansas, I would be remiss to confirm or to say that they do. And in addition to that, of course, there are private and national foundations who look at these types of issues. And one thing that is kind of just a strategic component is you might not find that a lot of organizations will fund adolescent substance abuse prevention or even adolescent suicide prevention, but they will fund adolescent development, they'll fund educational programs, they'll fund all kinds of other kind of keywords for youth. And so finding ways, of course, that you can stick your initiatives into their framework is going to help you procure additional resources. So we can talk about that at another time when we talk about fundraising. But sorry, it was on topic for the moment. So I wanted to make sure that I offered that to the team. So our last and final slide, and we actually might get out of here a little bit early today, which rarely ever happens. But so our last and final slide is talking about kind of some other institutions that exist. So looking at the system of care, and for those of you guys that may not be familiar with that, the system of care is a formal term that describes state or government entities or organizations specifically that are designed to work for or support children. And so you see child welfare or child protective services, basically the education system, the juvenile justice system, primary care, so like the medical system, whether that be behavioral health or physical health care. All of those partners are formally part of what is considered the system of care. And especially if you're talking about Medicaid populations, there's a lot of very focused attention and energy around coordination between these different parties on a national level. And so what's nice is that also lends itself to opportunities for us as individuals that are also focusing on the same target population. A lot of, well, for those of you that are joining us that are focusing on adolescent substance use, these also become individuals that can become partners for us. And if you're focusing on adults, a lot of this still applies. You'll just use the adult version of it. So as opposed to the juvenile justice system, you would obviously talk about the adult correction system. And of course, there's adult protective services that mirrors child protective services. There's universities and higher education. And of course, the medical system applies to adults just as much as it does youth. And so the point of that is that these people also have resources and they also have a lot of knowledge. So obviously, in a medical context, you're going to find a lot of individuals that understand substance use and behavioral health and social determinants of health. And risk factors and all of those different things. So these can become key strategic partners for us to leverage. I'm sure you'll find, that physicians and psychiatrists and these folks are probably not as likely to commit, 5 hours a week to participate in our work, but they can definitely serve as consultants. They can definitely serve, and unpaid consultants, but advisors or people that can help procure resources. And they, of course, if you're able to partner with organizations or service providers, they can have additional resources that will definitely help us advance kind of our projects and goals. So looking at those different system partners. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about private fundraising strategies. I really don't feel like I can do it justice in just a few moments, but lots and lots of ways to raise money. And so, of course, depending on where you're at in your organization and depending on what your financial or fundraising goals are, it's important to kind of sit back and consider kind of what the best strategies are going to be. And we talked through a little bit of going to and creating partnerships with some of these organizations. That can be an opportunity to procure revenue. Of course, there's, kind of our go-to strategy in health and human services is to apply for a grant. And so that's definitely an option. And we talked through some of the funding agencies that may have grants available, such as the Department of Juvenile Justice. They oftentimes are offering funding for different activities. SAMHSA is oftentimes offering funding for different substance abuse activities, as well as different private foundations, etc. And then, of course, there's some of these other projects out there that may be helpful. If for whatever reason one of these is striking your fancy or you're interested in more information about them, I'm probably going to say just go ahead and reach out to me. And I'd be happy to have kind of a one-on-one conversation with you guys about whatever your interests are or whatever your needs are. And I'm happy to explain or provide resources on how to develop any of these strategies because I have done them all over the years. And so I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. We've covered a lot, and I feel like I talked really fast today, so I hope it was coherent. I want to give some time for folks to ask questions. So please, if you have a question, take some time to type it in the chat box for me. Again, I feel like I sped through a lot of content today, so I wasn't able to really chew on a lot of things with you guys. I'm typing a link in the chat box right now to the evaluation that you will need to fill out in order to receive credit for today. So please go ahead and click that link. It's the same link that's on this slide. This slide also has my email address and my cell phone number. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of different points that I talked about that I encourage you guys to reach out to me. If you guys need anything or have any questions, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'll go ahead and pause and see if there are any questions from the audience. All right. Well, with that, I will go ahead and say thank you all for joining us. It looks like we had a pretty good turnout today, so that's always encouraging. And we do have additional trainings coming up in the next couple of weeks, so please stay tuned. And please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I really, honestly, and earnestly enjoy hearing from folks one on one, and I'm very happy to offer any additional resources that I have. So with that, I hope you guys will all have a fantastic rest of your day.